Hollywood made some absolutely unhinged films about Vietnam. And here's the crazy part. The best ones weren't even made during the war. They came years later when directors finally understood what they were actually saying. Today, we're counting down 13 of the most brutal, controversial, and unforgettable Vietnam War films ever made. The number one film literally caused riots when it premiered. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Number 13. Hamburger Hill. 1987, John Irvin's Hamburger Hill might be the most exhausting war movie ever made. This film follows the 101st Airborne Division as they assault Hill 937, a worthless piece of terrain that takes 10 days of absolute hell to capture. Soldiers attack the same hill over and over, getting slaughtered, then doing it again. The film cost $70 million, but made only $21.4 million because audiences hated how unrelentingly depressing it was. The opening assault is 10 straight minutes of non-stop combat with practically zero dialogue, just screaming and explosions and men dying in every direction. When they finally capture the hill, the soldiers are told they're leaving in 2 weeks anyway, making the entire nightmare pointless. Director Irvin worked with actual Vietnam veterans who kept saying the film wasn't graphic enough. Modern audiences recognize Hamburger Hill as one of the truest depictions of infantry combat ever made. A film that understands war is about exhaustion and waste, not heroism. Number 12. The Green Berets, 1968. John Wayne decided to make a pro-war Vietnam movie right in the middle of massive anti-war protests. And the result is fascinating for all the wrong reasons. The Green Berets follows an Army Special Forces detachment in South Vietnam, fighting communist insurgency. Wayne plays Colonel Mike Kirby, basically playing himself, a tough-talking patriot who believes in the mission without question. The film was shot with Pentagon approval using actual Green Beret soldiers as actors and real military equipment. The battle scenes feature genuine military tactics because the soldiers performing them had actually done this in real combat. But the narrative is cartoonishly pro-war. Every Vietnamese character helping Americans is heroic. Every communist is a cold, faceless villain. Wayne was gravely ill during production and could barely move through scenes. The film opened to massive protests outside theaters. Anti-war demonstrators blocked entrances, and major cities saw confrontations between hawks and doves. It made $7.2 million on a $20 million budget. The Green Berets has become a fascinating historical artifact, revealing what pro-war filmmakers wanted audiences to believe in 1968, when the country was tearing itself apart over Vietnam. Number 11. Platoon, 1986. Oliver Stone made Platoon 6 years after the war ended, basing it directly on his own combat experiences as an infantryman. The film follows Chris Taylor as he's deployed to a war he doesn't understand and learns that horror doesn't have an ideology. Platoon is structured around two sergeants representing opposite approaches to survival: Elias, who shows compassion, and Barnes, a ruthless killer. Soldiers must choose which version of warfare to embrace. Stone filmed in the Philippines during actual monsoon season. With rain so heavy, actors could barely see each other. Lead actor Charlie Sheen contracted malaria during filming and kept working while burning with fever. The most controversial scene involves American soldiers massacring a village, executing civilians. When Platoon premiered at film festivals, viewers walked out. The film earned $138 million on a $6 million budget, becoming massive success because American audiences were finally ready to see what really happened. Oliver Stone won the Oscar for Best Director. Platoon won Best Picture. The film changed how Hollywood approached Vietnam, proving the public wanted truth over propaganda. Number 10. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Francis Ford Coppola made what might be the most unhinged war movie ever created, and the production nearly destroyed him personally. Apocalypse Now follows Captain Sheen as he travels upriver into Cambodia to find and assassinate a rogue army officer who's become godlike to his soldiers. The journey becomes increasingly surreal, more nightmare than war film. Coppola decided to shoot in the Philippines during actual typhoon season. The budget was $31 million, one of the most expensive films ever made at that time. By the end, production spiraled so far out of control that Coppola was operating on cocaine, directing scenes at 3 in the morning, sometimes forgetting what he'd already shot. Martin Sheen suffered a major heart attack during production at only 36 years old. Marlon Brando showed up overweight, refused to learn his lines, and improvised most dialogue. Brando charged $3.7 million for 4 weeks of work. Filming took over a year. Editing took another year. By the time Apocalypse Now premiered, Coppola had lost his mind almost literally. The film opened to absolutely divided critical reception. It made $150 million worldwide and became increasingly appreciated over time. The helicopter assault sequence set to Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries remains probably the most iconic war imagery ever filmed. Apocalypse Now taught Hollywood that war films could be abstract, hallucinatory, and philosophically unsettling. Number 9. Under Fire. 1983, Roger Spottiswoode made a film about war correspondents covering the Nicaraguan Civil War, which became an accidental commentary on the Vietnam War and foreign intervention. The film follows photographers documenting soldiers dying and governments lying about their involvement. Nick Nolte plays an American photographer willing to do increasingly unethical things to get the perfect story. The production was shot on location in Nicaragua during actual political instability, making the set genuinely dangerous. Local militia groups watched production, suspicious of American filmmakers documenting their conflict. The crew maintained armed security throughout shooting. There's a famous scene where an actual gunfight breaks out near the film set, and you can hear real bullets hitting nearby buildings. The director chose not to stop filming because the authenticity was too valuable. Under Fire made $21.2 million and earned critical praise for its unflinching look at how media manufactures war narratives. Gene Hackman plays a rival cameraman, and competition between photographers becomes metaphorical for how America approaches foreign conflicts. The film shows journalists profiting from tragedy, choosing dramatic shots over ethical responsibility. Modern audiences recognize Under Fire as a film that anticipated how social media would transform war into content. Number 8. Born on the 4th of July, 1989. Oliver Stone returned with another autobiographical war film based on Ron Kovich, a Marine paralyzed in combat who became a legendary anti-war activist. Tom Cruise plays Kovich, spending weeks in a wheelchair learning how to move as a disabled person. He trained with actual Vietnam veterans and interviewed Kovich extensively. The film earned $70.1 million on a $32 million budget. Critics praised Cruise's willingness to play vulnerability rather than bravado. The film won multiple Academy Award nominations. What makes this powerful is how it refuses to frame disability as inspirational tragedy. Kovich's journey is angry, messy, and genuinely confrontational. He's not a noble victim accepting his fate. He's furious at a government that sent him to war for nothing and then abandoned him when he returned injured. Born on the 4th of July showed American audiences that anti-war activism wasn't un-American. It was an American veteran's response to a war he realized was pointless. Number 7. A Bright Shining Lie. 1998. Terry George directed this HBO movie about Lieutenant Colonel John Paul Vann, a military officer who became convinced the war was unwinnable and started telling the truth to journalists. Bill Paxton plays Vann, showing a man caught between military loyalty and moral responsibility. The film reveals how Vann systematically discovered that military reports were completely fabricated. Body counts were inflated, victories were misrepresented. The entire strategy was based on false intelligence that higher-ranking officers didn't want questioned. Vann risked his career by leaking information to the press. He was mocked by military leadership for talking about problems instead of following orders. Eventually, Vann was vindicated, though by then, the war was already lost. A Bright Shining Lie made only $6.2 million because HBO movies rarely achieve theatrical distribution. The film became incredibly important in military circles because it showed how institutions protect themselves from inconvenient truths. The cinematography contrasts beautiful Vietnamese landscapes with violence happening in them, creating visual tension. A Bright Shining Lie demonstrates that the Vietnam War wasn't lost against an external enemy. It was lost because American institutions chose loyalty over truth. Number 6. Heaven and Earth. 1993. Oliver Stone completed his Vietnam War trilogy with Heaven and Earth, telling the story from a Vietnamese perspective through the life of a woman named Lily Hayslip. This film is radically different because it centers Vietnamese experience rather than American soldiers. Lily becomes a war victim, a refugee, and an American citizen trying to maintain her identity. The production was controversial because Stone centered a woman's trauma rather than military strategy. Traditional war movie audiences didn't know what to do with a film prioritizing emotional truth over battle sequences. Heaven and Earth earned only $20 million on a $50 million budget. Stone cast Heap T. Lay, an unknown actress, in the lead role. The film shows how the American war fundamentally destroyed Vietnamese society, separated families, and created generations of trauma. Stone demonstrates that war doesn't have a good side from the Vietnamese perspective. There are only survivors and casualties. The film's conclusion shows Le Lai returning to Vietnam years later to find her roots. Heaven and Earth proved that American cinema could finally tell Vietnam stories centering Vietnamese humanity rather than American guilt. Number 5. 84 Charlie Mopic. 1989, Patrick Duncan wrote and directed this small-budget film about a 6-man reconnaissance team traveling into Cambodia to gather intelligence, knowing they'll probably die. The film works differently from other war movies because it's claustrophobic despite taking place in an open jungle. Soldiers can't radio for help. They can't call air support. They're completely isolated. The film cost only $1.1 million and made $1.4 million. Director Duncan used actual military veterans as actors and choreographed combat sequences that felt genuinely chaotic. What makes 84 Charlie Mopic special is its psychological focus. Soldiers experience fear that's almost unbearable because they're always expecting ambush. Every shadow might hide enemy soldiers. Every sound could be a tripwire. The film maintains this tension relentlessly. Critics praise the film's authenticity and refusal to glorify military action. Instead, it shows soldiers coping with impossible fear while performing their duties. 84 Charlie Mopic proved that Vietnam War films didn't need massive budgets to achieve emotional impact. Number 4. The Deer Hunter. 1978, Michael Cimino made one of the most controversial Vietnam War films ever released, and the controversy wasn't about combat sequences. The Deer Hunter follows steel mill workers from Pennsylvania who go to Vietnam, with significant portions dedicated to their lives before and after the war. Robert De Niro plays Michael, a steelworker who becomes a soldier and returns traumatized. Christopher Walken plays Nick, who survives combat but is fundamentally shattered. Walken's performance is quietly devastating, showing a man whose will to live has been broken. The film earned $48.3 million on a $15 million budget. It won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. The most controversial scene involves Russian roulette in a Vietnamese prison camp, something that historically probably never happened. The Deer Hunter becomes increasingly surreal, starting as realistic drama and gradually becoming dreamlike. Walken's final scene, sitting in a Vietnamese village unable to reconcile with American life, remains haunting decades later. Modern audiences recognize The Deer Hunter as a film that sacrificed historical accuracy for emotional truth. Number 3. Full Metal Jacket. 1987. Stanley Kubrick made a Vietnam War film that splits into 2 completely different movies, and that structural choice becomes the entire point. Full Metal Jacket follows recruits through boot camp, showing a drill sergeant's brutal psychological destruction of young men's identities. R. Lee Ermey plays Sergeant Hartman, delivering insults that seem personally crafted to destroy each recruit's sense of self-worth. Ermey improvised much of his dialogue with almost incomprehensible intensity. The second half shifts to Vietnam itself, following soldiers through urban combat. The tonal shift is jarring and intentional. Kubrick wanted audiences to feel the disorientation soldiers experience going from controlled boot camp to chaotic combat. Full Metal Jacket earned $46.4 million on a $50 million budget. Critics praised Kubrick's distinctive style and refusal to sentimentalize military experience. The film showed that basic training itself is a war against recruits' identities. Matthew Modine plays Joker, a photographer caught between documenting war and participating in it. By the film's conclusion, Joker must reconcile his role as observer with active combat reality. Full Metal Jacket remains arguably the definitive film about how militaries destroy civilian psychologies. Number 2. Hearts and Minds. 1970's Peter Davis made what might be the most politically committed documentary ever about the Vietnam War. Hearts and Minds combines interviews, historical footage, and combat sequences to argue that America's foreign policy in Southeast Asia was fundamentally immoral. Davis interviewed generals, politicians, activists, soldiers, Vietnamese civilians, and protesters, creating a patchwork narrative revealing profound disagreement about the war's purpose. The film won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 1974, right in the middle of American reckoning with Vietnam's end. The acceptance speech became controversial because winners made anti-war statements during their acceptance. Hearts and Minds made $28 million, extraordinary for a documentary, meaning audiences desperately wanted to understand what went wrong in Vietnam. The film shows American soldiers expressing remorse about their actions. It shows generals defending strategies that killed hundreds of thousands of people. Most provocatively, it shows American politicians revealing their honest beliefs about Asian people and why American superiority justified intervention. Hearts and Minds doesn't present balanced arguments. It's explicitly anti-war and anti-imperialist. The film remains relevant because it documents exactly how powerful institutions rationalize violence. Hearts and Minds proves that the best war films sometimes don't include dramatized combat at all. Number 1. The Killing Fields. 1984. Roland Joffé made a film about the Cambodian genocide during and immediately after the Vietnam War, focusing on the relationship between American journalist Dith Pran and Cambodian photojournalist Dith Pran. Sam Waterston plays the American journalist, and Haing S. Ngor plays Pran, delivering one of the most powerful performances in cinema history. Here's what makes this extraordinary. Ngor had never acted professionally before. He was a Cambodian doctor who emigrated to America after surviving the Khmer Rouge. Joffé cast him as essentially himself, and Ngor's raw authenticity makes every scene devastatingly real. The film earned $40.7 million on an $18 million budget. It won 3 Academy Awards and earned nominations for Best Picture. Ngor won Best Supporting Actor, becoming the first non-professional actor to win in that category. The Killing Fields doesn't just show combat. It shows genocide. After America dropped bombs on Cambodia, destabilizing the government, the Khmer Rouge filled the power vacuum and murdered approximately 1.7 million people, roughly a quarter of Cambodia's population. The film shows this catastrophe unfolding, with Pran witnessing systematic murder, starvation, and torture. Critics called The Killing Fields the most important war film ever made because it extended conversation about Vietnam beyond America's experience. It showed that American military intervention creates global catastrophes affecting people who had nothing to do with the original conflict. All right, viewers, we've covered 13 of the most brutal, honest, and important Vietnam War films ever made. Which one shifted your perspective on the conflict? Did any of these films change how you understood that era? Which one hit hardest? And here's the real question. Are raw, unflinching documentaries of American failure more important than entertainment films that tell good stories? Should war cinema prioritize historical accuracy or emotional truth? Drop your takes in the comments below and subscribe for more deep dives into cinema history.